Jake had always been the kind of person who noticed things others missed. Maybe it came from working as a freelance writer, always looking for stories in everyday life. But when Luna moved into the apartment across the hall, even he couldn't have imagined what kind of story he was about to stumble into. It started with small things, really small, the kind of details most people would brush off without a second thought. But Jake wasn't most people. Luna arrived on a Tuesday morning. In March, with no moving truck, no friends helping her carry boxes, and no noise whatsoever. Jake only knew someone new had moved in because he saw her standing in the hallway, perfectly still, staring at her door like she was trying to remember how it worked. She held a single black suitcase and wore clothes that looked expensive, but somehow timeless. Not trendy expensive, but quality expensive. The kind of clothes that could have been made yesterday or 50 years ago. "Hi there," Jake had said, stepping out to grab his mail. "Welcome to the building." She turned to look at him, and that's when he noticed her eyes. They were the most unusual shade of green he'd ever seen. Not emerald green or forest green, but something that reminded him of deep ocean water when sunlight hits it just right. And there was something else about them, too. They looked old, not tired old, but wise old. Like she'd seen things that would take most people a lifetime to witness. "Thank you," she replied with a slight smile. Her voice was soft but clear, with just the hint of an accent he couldn't place. "I'm Luna." "Jake," he said, extending his hand. When she shook it, her skin felt unusually cool, even through the thin gloves she wore. "If you need anything, I'm right across the hall. This building can be a bit quirky." She nodded politely and disappeared into her apartment. That was the beginning of 3 months of the strangest neighborly experience Jake had ever had. The first thing he noticed was the sounds, or rather the lack of them. In their old building with thin walls, Jake could hear everything. Mrs. Chen upstairs running her vacuum at exactly 8 a.m. every Saturday. The college students downstairs playing music way too loud on weekends. The couple next door arguing about whose turn it was to do dishes. But from Luna's apartment, nothing. No television, no music, no phone conversations, no cooking sounds, no footsteps. For the first week, Jake wondered if she'd moved out as quietly as she'd moved in. Then he'd see her in the hallway or lobby, always polite, always perfectly put together, always wearing those thin gloves. The second thing was her schedule. Jake worked from home, which meant he had a pretty good sense of when people came and went. Most neighbors had patterns you could set your watch by. Luna didn't seem to have any pattern at all. Sometimes he'd hear her door close at 3 a.m. Other times he'd see her coming back at dawn. Yet every time he ran into her during normal hours, she looked completely rested. No dark circles under her eyes, no tired posture, no signs that she'd been up all night. "Do you work nights?" he asked her one morning when they ended up in the elevator together. "Sometimes," she said, which wasn't really an answer. "My schedule is flexible." He tried to make more conversation, but Luna had a way of giving responses that were polite but didn't actually tell you anything. She was like a master at saying words without sharing information. Then there were her groceries. Jake didn't mean to spy, but he couldn't help noticing when they occasionally rode the elevator together. Her shopping bags were always the same. Fresh vegetables, fruits, bottles of spring water, and oddly enough, large containers of sea salt. Lots of sea salt. Way more than any normal person would need for cooking. "You must really like to cook," he commented once, gesturing at her bags. "I prefer natural foods," she replied, which again didn't really explain the industrial quantities of salt. But the strangest thing happened during the power outage in June. The whole block went dark around 11 p.m. on a Thursday. Jake was working on his laptop when everything shut down. He grabbed his phone's flashlight and went to check if it was just his apartment. The hallway was pitch black, and he could hear neighbors opening doors, asking if anyone else had lost power. That's when he saw it. A faint glow coming from underneath Luna's door. Not the harsh white light of a phone or the orange flicker of candles. This was different. Soft and blue-white, like moonlight but steady. It was beautiful and completely impossible. Jake stood there staring at it for several minutes, trying to think of any logical explanation. Maybe she had some kind of emergency lighting system, but what kind of emergency lights glowed blue? And why was there no sound coming from her apartment when everyone else was stumbling around in the dark, bumping into furniture and looking for flashlights? The power came back on about an hour later, and the mysterious glow disappeared. Jake spent the rest of the night lying awake, trying to convince himself he'd imagined it, but he knew he hadn't. The next morning, he knocked on Luna's door. "Hey, I hope the power outage didn't cause you any problems last night," he said when she answered. "What power outage?" she asked, and Jake was pretty sure she wasn't joking. That's when he really started paying attention, not in a creepy way, but in a curious way. The way a writer pays attention when they sense there's a story worth telling. He started noticing more things, like how Luna never seemed to get mail. Not bills, not packages, not even junk mail. Jake had never met anyone who didn't get at least some mail. He started noticing that her apartment never smelled like food, even though she bought groceries. He started noticing that he never saw her carrying keys, yet her door was always locked. Most importantly, he started noticing that despite claiming to be in her early 30s, Luna looked exactly the same every single day. Not just well-rested, but unchanged. Her skin never had a blemish, her hair was always perfect, and she moved with a grace that seemed almost too smooth for a regular person. Jake tried looking her up online. He searched social media, public records, professional directories, anywhere he could think of. Nothing. In an age where everyone had some kind of digital footprint, Luna appeared to exist only in the physical world. He told himself he was just being a good neighbor, looking out for someone who might be in some kind of trouble. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Luna represented a mystery, and Jake had never been able to resist a good mystery. He had no idea that his curiosity was about to change not just his life, but possibly the course of human history itself. The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday morning. Jake was on his balcony, watering his small collection of plants. He wasn't much of a gardener, but having some green in his life made the concrete jungle feel a little more human. The morning sun was warm, and a gentle breeze made it the perfect time to tend to his tiny urban garden. He was reaching over to water his tomato plant when a strong gust of wind caught him off guard. The watering can slipped from his hands, and, before he could catch it, the whole thing tumbled over the balcony railing. Jake watched in horror as 3 gallons of water came crashing down onto Luna's balcony, directly below his. "Oh, no, no, no," he muttered, leaning over to see the damage. Water was everywhere on her balcony, pooling around what looked like some kind of seating area. Even worse, some of it was seeping under her sliding door into her apartment. Jake had always prided himself on being a responsible neighbor. The last thing he wanted was to flood Luna's place and ruin her belongings. He grabbed a towel and rushed downstairs to her floor, knocking on her door with genuine worry. "Luna? It's Jake from upstairs. I'm so sorry, but I accidentally spilled water all over your balcony. Some of it might have gotten inside your apartment. I'd like to help clean it up." He waited. He could hear movement inside, soft sounds like someone walking around, but she didn't come to the door. "Luna?" he called again. "I really need to make sure I didn't damage anything. I'll pay for any repairs needed." Still no answer, even though he was certain she was home. The sounds inside continued, but they were strange, not like normal footsteps or furniture being moved. More like a gentle humming sound, almost musical. Jake stood there for 5 more minutes, growing more concerned by the second. What if the water had caused some kind of electrical problem? What if she was hurt and couldn't get to the door? His worry finally overcame his respect for privacy. The building manager had given him a master key for emergencies, since Jake often helped elderly residents with small maintenance issues. This felt like an emergency. He pulled out the key, called Luna's name one more time, and slowly opened the door. "Luna, I'm coming in to check for water damage. Please don't be alarmed." The moment Jake stepped inside, he knew something was impossibly wrong. This wasn't the same apartment he'd glimpsed before when Luna had briefly opened her door. The walls seemed to shimmer with a soft, pearl-like glow. Strange symbols covered every surface, pulsing gently with light that shifted from blue to silver to gold. The symbols weren't painted on, they appeared to be part of the walls themselves, moving and changing like living things. But that wasn't the most shocking part. In the center of what should have been a normal living room stood something that belonged in a science fiction movie. It looked like a tree made of crystal, about 7 feet tall, with branches that moved like liquid mercury. Each branch ended in what appeared to be small orbs of pure light, and the whole thing hummed with the same musical sound he'd heard from outside. Jake's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. This had to be some kind of elaborate art, installation, or maybe Luna was involved in special effects for movies. There had to be a logical explanation. Then he looked up. Luna was floating 3 feet above the floor, not standing on anything, not hanging from anything, just floating, sitting cross-legged in midair like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her eyes were closed, and she seemed to be in some kind of deep meditation. But that wasn't the most incredible part. She was glowing. The same soft blue-white light Jake had seen under her door during the power outage was coming from her skin. Her whole body radiated this gentle luminescence, and her hair moved around her face like she was underwater, even though there was no breeze in the room. As Jake watched, frozen in disbelief, Luna's appearance began to shift. Her features became more angular, more refined. Her ears, previously hidden by her hair, were now visible and slightly pointed. Her skin took on an almost translucent quality, and when she breathed, tiny sparkles of light seemed to flow in and out of her lungs. Jake must have made some sound because Luna's eyes suddenly opened. They locked onto his, and in that moment, he saw something that took his breath away. Her eyes weren't just that unusual green color anymore. They held flecks of gold and silver that moved like stars, and they were filled with an intelligence and sadness that seemed to span centuries. Time seemed to stop. They stared at each other across an impossible scene, both understanding that everything had just changed forever. Slowly, gracefully, Luna descended to the floor. As her feet touched the ground, her appearance shifted back to the human form Jake recognized, though the glow remained faintly visible around her edges. The symbols on the walls faded, but didn't disappear completely, and the crystal tree continued its gentle humming. "I was wondering when this day would come," Luna said, her voice carrying harmonics that definitely didn't come from a human throat. The words seemed to resonate in the air around them, creating a sound that was both beautiful and otherworldly. Jake opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind was reeling, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Everything he thought he knew about reality had just been turned upside down in the span of 30 seconds. Luna moved toward him with that same impossible grace he'd noticed before, but now it made perfect sense. She wasn't trying to walk like a human. She was something else entirely, something that had been pretending to be human. "You're not going to faint, are you?" she asked, and despite everything, there was genuine concern in her voice. Humans sometimes have strong physical reactions to revelations like this. "Humans," Jake repeated weakly. "You said humans like you're not one." Luna nodded slowly. "That's because I'm not. And now that you know, both of our lives are about to become much more complicated." Jake stood there, staring at Luna, trying to wrap his mind around what she'd just said. The glowing symbols on the walls had dimmed, but were still visible, casting strange shadows that danced around the room. The crystal tree continued its soft humming, and Luna remained perfectly still, waiting for him to process everything. "You're not human," Jake said slowly, more to himself than to her. "You're actually not human." "No, I'm not," Luna replied gently. "I'm from a place very far from here, a planet called Kepler 442b, though we call it Ethros. I've been living on Earth for 30 years now, studying your people." 30 years. Jake looked at her face, which appeared to be that of someone in their early 30s. "But you look so young. How is that possible?" Luna gestured toward the small seating area near the crystal tree. "Perhaps you should sit down. This story is quite long, and I imagine it's going to be difficult to believe, even after what you've just seen." Jake nodded and took a seat on what appeared to be a perfectly normal chair, though it felt unusually comfortable. Luna sat across from him, and as she did, her skin continued to emit that soft glow. It was mesmerizing and strangely calming. "My people live much longer than humans," she began. "What you consider a lifetime, we consider early adulthood. I'm actually quite young by our standards, only about 150 of your years old." 150 years old, Jake repeated, shaking his head. "This is insane, but please keep going." Luna smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it seemed completely genuine. "My planet is dying, Jake. Not quickly, but steadily. Our sun is cooling, and our atmosphere is slowly changing in ways that will make life impossible within the next few centuries. My people have been searching for new homes among the stars for generations." She stood up and walked over to the crystal tree, placing her hand on its surface. Immediately, the branches began to move more actively, and images appeared in the air above it. Jake gasped as he saw what looked like a planet covered in beautiful crystalline cities, with beings that looked similar to Luna moving through spaces that seemed to blend technology and nature seamlessly. "This is Ethros," Luna said. "Or rather, this is how it used to look. We built our civilization to work in harmony with our world, but we couldn't control the natural death of our star." The images changed, showing the same cities but dimmer, with fewer people visible. The crystal structures looked less vibrant, and there was something sad about the whole scene. "We're not conquerors, Jake. We're refugees, but we're also careful. We don't just show up on planets and hope for the best. We send advanced teams to study potential new homes, to understand the existing life forms, to see if peaceful coexistence is possible." "And you're part of one of these advanced teams," Jake said, beginning to understand. "Exactly. I was sent here with a mission to observe human civilization, to learn about your social structures, your technologies, your strengths and weaknesses. The information I gather helps my people decide how to approach contact with your species." Luna waved her hand, and the images above the crystal tree changed again. Now Jake could see scenes of Earth from space, then closer views of cities, forests, oceans. It was beautiful, but also somehow clinical, like surveillance footage. I was supposed to complete my mission in 10 years and return home with my report. That was 30 years ago. "What happened?" Jake asked. "Why didn't you go back?" Luna turned, away from the crystal tree, and looked directly at him. For the first time, Jake saw something in her expression that looked almost human. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. I became fascinated by humans in ways I wasn't supposed to. My people are very logical, very practical. We make decisions based on facts and efficiency. Emotions, as you understand them, are something we evolved past long ago. We feel curiosity, satisfaction, purpose, but not the complex emotional experiences that drive so much of human behavior." She began to pace around the room, her movements still graceful but now showing signs of agitation. "But living among humans, watching you, interacting with you, I started to experience things I'd never felt before. I started to understand concepts like joy, sadness, hope, and something else that I think you would call affection. These feelings confused me, so I requested extensions to my mission. I told my superiors I needed more time to fully understand human complexity. And they agreed? At first, yes. But now they're growing impatient. They want my final report and they want me to come home. Luna stopped pacing and looked at Jake with an expression he couldn't quite read. There's something else you need. To know. I'm not alone anymore. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? My replacement is coming. Another observer. One who won't be influenced by human emotions because they're specifically trained to resist them. They'll complete the mission I was supposed to finish 30 years ago. And then what happens? Luna was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. That depends on my report. If I tell my people that humans are primitive and chaotic, they'll wait longer before making contact, perhaps another century or two. If I tell them humans are advanced enough for contact but too dangerous to coexist with, they'll avoid Earth entirely. And if you tell them humans are ready for contact, then they'll come. Not as invaders, but as refugees seeking a new home. They'll approach your governments and propose a partnership. They'll offer advanced technology in exchange for land and resources. Jake thought about this for a moment. That doesn't sound so bad, doesn't it? Luna asked. Jake, my people are incredibly advanced. They're also logical to a fault. They wouldn't destroy humanity, but they would change it completely. They would see inefficiencies in your systems and fix them. They would see conflicts and resolve them through superior technology. They would essentially become benevolent rulers of Earth, believing they're helping humanity reach its potential. But humans wouldn't be free to choose their own path anymore. Exactly. And that's the problem I've been wrestling with for 30 years. I've come to believe that the chaos and inefficiency my people would want to fix are actually essential parts of what makes humans special. Your ability to feel deeply, to make choices based on hope rather than logic, to create beauty even when it serves no practical purpose, these things are what make humanity worth preserving. Luna sat back down across from him, and Jake could see the weight of her dilemma in her eyes. So what are you going to do? He asked. I don't know, she admitted. But Jake, I need you to understand something. By seeing me like this, by learning what you've learned, you're now part of this situation. Your life is about to change in ways you can't imagine. Jake looked around the impossible room, at the glowing symbols and the crystal tree, at this beautiful being from another world who had been living across the hall from him for months. He thought about everything she'd told him, about the choice she was facing, about what it might mean for all of humanity. What do you need me to do? He asked. The weight of Luna's question hung in the air between them. Jake stared at her, realizing that his answer wouldn't just affect his own life, but potentially the future of every person on Earth. It was the kind of responsibility he'd never imagined facing, especially not on a Tuesday morning that had started with him watering plants. I need to understand something first, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. When your replacement arrives, what exactly will happen to you? Luna's expression grew darker. That depends on what I choose to do. If I cooperate, if I submit my report and return home quietly, I'll face questioning about why I took so long. There will be consequences, but they'll be manageable. My people don't believe in harsh punishment. They'll likely assign me to a different role, somewhere I can't be influenced by emotional species. And if you don't cooperate, then I become what my people would consider a traitor. They don't understand the concept of choosing emotion over logic. To them, my behavior would seem like a mental illness that needs to be corrected. Jake didn't like the sound of that. Corrected how? They would try to fix me. Remove the emotional responses I've developed. Restore my original logical programming. Luna touched her chest, over her heart. It wouldn't kill me, but it would erase everything I've become during my time here. I would go back to being the person I was 30 years ago, before I learned what it meant to care about something beyond my mission. The thought of Luna losing everything that made her unique, everything she'd learned about being human, struck Jake as deeply wrong. But he also understood the impossible position she was in. "There has to be another option," he said. "What if you just refuse to go back at all?" "I've thought about that. I could request asylum on Earth, try to warn your governments about what's coming. But Jake, that would actually make things worse for humanity." "How?" Luna stood up and walked back to the crystal tree. She touched its surface, and new images appeared in the air above them. Jake saw what looked like massive ships moving through space, beautiful but clearly powerful. "My people are patient, but they're not passive. If I don't return, if they suspect I've compromised the mission, they'll assume Earth is more dangerous than they originally thought. They'll accelerate their plans." The images changed, showing the same ships approaching Earth, but now there were many more of them. Instead of taking years to plan a careful first contact, they might decide to establish a presence here within months. They'd still try to be peaceful, but they'd be much more controlling. They'd see humanity as a species that corrupted one of their own, and they'd be determined not to let it happen again. Jake felt a chill as he watched the images. Even though the ships looked graceful rather than threatening, there was something terrifying about the idea of such advanced beings arriving with mistrust already in their hearts. "So if you stay, things get worse. If you go back, you lose yourself. And if you submit a negative report about humans, then my people wait longer. But eventually they'll send other observers. And those observers won't have spent 30 years learning to care about humanity." Jake ran his hands through his hair, trying to think. "What kind of report were you planning to submit before all this happened?" "I was going to recommend limited contact. Suggest that humans needed more time to mature as a species, but that there was potential for future cooperation. It would have bought your people maybe 50 to 100 years. And now?" Luna turned away from the crystal tree and looked at him with those impossible eyes. "Now I'm not sure I can submit any report at all, because I've realized something my people never anticipated." "What's that?" "I don't want to leave. I don't want to go back to a world where logic is the only thing that matters, where beauty exists only if it serves a purpose, where relationships are based on efficiency rather than affection." She paused, and Jake could see her struggling with emotions that were still new to her. "I've fallen in love with being human, Jake. Not just with humanity as a species, but with the experience of being human myself." This revelation hit Jake harder than he expected. He'd been thinking about Luna as someone pretending to be human, but now he realized she'd been becoming human in ways that went far deeper than just appearance. "There's something else," Luna continued. "Something I haven't told you yet." Jake wasn't sure he could handle any more revelations, but he nodded for her to continue. "My feelings about humanity aren't the only thing that's changed. My feelings about you specifically have become complicated." Jake felt his heart skip a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean that when I think about leaving Earth, the hardest part isn't abandoning humanity in general. It's the thought of never seeing you again." Luna's voice was barely above a whisper now. "I've been watching you for months, Jake. Your kindness, your curiosity, the way you notice things others miss. You represent everything I've come to love about being human." Jake stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Luna, are you telling me that I've developed feelings for you? Yes, I know it's impossible. I know it complicates everything even more. But I needed you to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." Jake stood up and walked over to her. Up close, he could see the faint glow of her skin, the way her hair seemed to move with its own current. She was alien, impossible, from another world entirely. And yet, when he looked into her eyes, he saw something unmistakably real. "Luna, I need to tell you something too. These past few months I've been more interested in you than I've ever been in anyone. I told myself it was just curiosity, but it was more than that. Even before I knew what you really were, I was drawn to you in ways I couldn't explain. They stood there looking at each other across the space between human and alien, between Earth and the stars. The crystal tree hummed softly in the background, and the symbols on the walls pulsed with gentle light. "So what do we do?" Jake asked finally. "I don't know," Luna admitted, "but I know I can't make this decision alone anymore. Whatever happens next, it affects both of us. It affects everyone." Jake reached out and took her hand. Her skin was still cool, still not quite human, but it felt right in his. "Then we figure it out together," he said. "But Luna, I need you to know that whatever choice you make, I'll stand by you. Even if it means facing your people, even if it means changing the course of human history. We're in this together now." Luna squeezed his hand, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked genuinely hopeful. "Thank you," she said. "But Jake, you need to understand that there's no going back from this point. Once we commit to a path, everything changes. Your life as you knew it is over." Jake looked around the impossible room, at this incredible woman from another world, at the choice that would determine the future of two species. Then he looked back at Luna and smiled. "My life as I knew it ended the moment I walked through that door," he said. "Now let's figure out how to write the next chapter." 3 days later, Jake's world had turned completely upside down. He sat in his apartment, staring at his laptop screen, but the words he was supposed to be writing for his freelance assignments seemed meaningless now. How could he focus on writing restaurant reviews when he knew that beings from another planet were planning to make contact with Earth? Luna had been teaching him about her people, preparing him for what was coming. She'd shown him more images through the crystal tree, explained their technology, their culture, their way of thinking. The more he learned, the more he understood the impossible situation they were in. Her people weren't evil. They genuinely believed they were trying to help. But their version of help would fundamentally change what it meant to be human. They would solve poverty, end wars, cure diseases, and fix climate change. They would make Earth a paradise. But it would be their version of paradise, built on logic and efficiency rather than human choice and freedom. They don't understand that. "The struggle is part of what makes us human," Luna had explained. "They see suffering and want to eliminate it, but they don't realize that our ability to overcome challenges, to choose hope in the face of difficulty, is what gives human life meaning." Now, as Jake sat in his apartment, he could hear Luna moving around across the hall. She'd been preparing for the arrival of her replacement, someone called Vex who would complete the mission she'd been avoiding for 30 years. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Jake opened it to find Luna standing there. But she looked different, more tense, more afraid than he'd ever seen her. "Vex is here," she said simply. Jake felt his stomach drop. "Already? I thought we had more time." "So did I. They arrived early. I think my people are more suspicious of my delays than I realized." Luna stepped into his apartment and closed the door behind her. "Jake, we need to make our decision now. Vex will want to meet with me within the hour. What are our options?" Luna began pacing around his living room, her movements more agitated than usual. "I can cooperate fully, submit to questioning, provide my report, and return home. That gives humanity maybe 50 years before the next phase of contact. And the other option? I can tell Vex that I'm requesting asylum on Earth, that I refuse to return and want to warn humanity about what's coming." Jake thought about what she'd told him before. "But that would make your people more aggressive about contact." "Yes. They'd see it as confirmation that Earth is a corrupting influence. They'd move much faster, probably arrive within 5 to 10 years instead of 50. So either humanity gets 50 years to prepare for contact they don't know is coming, or they get 10 years to prepare for contact they've been warned about. That's one way to look at it, Luna said. But there's a third option we haven't discussed. Jake looked at her carefully. What's that? I could lie in my report. Tell my people that Earth is unsuitable for colonization, that humans are too primitive, too violent, too chaotic to coexist with. That would buy humanity centuries, maybe forever. That sounds like the best option. Why haven't we talked about this before? Luna stopped pacing and looked at him with an expression of deep sadness. Because it would be a lie, Jake. And my people have ways of detecting deception. If they discovered I'd falsified my report, they would consider it an act of war against them. They would return with military force instead of diplomatic intentions. Jake sank into his chair. Every option seemed to lead to the same conclusion. Humanity was going to have to face this situation eventually, and there was no perfect way to handle it. What do you think we should do? He asked. I think we should trust humans to handle the truth, Luna said. I think we should request asylum, warn your governments, and give humanity the chance to prepare for what's coming. Even though it means your people will arrive sooner and be more suspicious. Even though it means that. Jake, I've spent 30 years learning about humans. You're resourceful, adaptable, and capable of incredible things when you work together. If anyone can figure out how to coexist with my people on equal terms, it's humanity. Jake stood up and walked over to her. And what about us? What happens to you if you stay? I don't know, Luna admitted. I'll be the first of my people to ever request asylum on another planet. Your governments might want to study me, imprison me, or use me as a bargaining chip. My own people might try to retrieve me by force. And what happens to us? Jake asked, gesturing between them. Luna's expression softened. I don't know that either. I'm not even sure what we are, Jake. I'm still learning how to be human, still figuring out these emotions I've developed. All I know is that I want the chance to find out. Jake reached out and took her hands. They were warmer than usual, he noticed. More human. Then let's do it, he said. Let's request asylum and warn humanity. Let's give our species the chance to meet as equals instead of as refugees and hosts. Luna searched his eyes. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. Your life will never be normal again. You'll be connected to the most important diplomatic situation in human history. Jake thought about his ordinary life, his small apartment, his freelance writing career, his quiet existence. Then he thought about the woman standing in front of him, about the choice between human freedom and cosmic safety, about the chance to be part of something bigger than himself. Luna, 3 days ago, my biggest worry was whether I'd have enough work to pay rent this month. Now I'm in love with someone from another planet and we're making decisions that could affect the future of 2 civilizations. Normal was never going to be an option again. Luna smiled, and Jake saw something in her expression he'd never seen before. Pure happiness, human happiness. In that case, she said, let's go change the course of history. They spent the next hour planning their approach. Luna would meet with Vex as scheduled, but instead of submitting her report, she would formally request asylum. Jake would document everything, creating evidence of her claims for when they approached government officials. As they prepared to leave for Luna's apartment, Jake felt a mixture of terror and excitement. He was about to meet another alien being, and everything that happened in the next few hours would determine not just his future and Luna's, but possibly the future of all human civilization. Are you ready? Luna asked, her hand on the door handle. Jake looked at her one more time. 3 days ago, she'd been his mysterious neighbor. Now she was the person he cared about most in the world, and together they were about to take a step that would change everything. No, he said honestly. But let's do it anyway. Luna opened the door, and they walked across the hall toward a future neither of them could predict. The crystal tree in Luna's apartment was humming more loudly than usual, and the symbols on her walls were pulsing rapidly. Even from the hallway, Jake could sense that something powerful was waiting for them. Vex had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. As they stood outside Luna's door, Jake realized that his story about finding out his neighbor's secret had become something much bigger. It had become the story of first contact between two civilizations, told through the unlikely romance between a human writer and an alien woman who'd learned to love being human. He couldn't get over it because it wasn't just Luna's secret anymore. It was their secret, and soon it would be humanity's secret to bear.